Okay, so today I'm going to tell you about the contributions of these two gentlemen to our understanding of the neurobiology of language. And so we have Paul Broca on the left here, who's a French neurologist, and on the right we have Karl Wernicke, a German neurologist. And the reason we're talking about them is because their work led to the so-called classic model of language in the brain. It's a model that is still important, and even contemporary work still engages with this model. So how was the model born? We'll start with Paul Broca. So Paul Broca basically conducted the first localization of language in the brain that was ever documented. So in 1861, he reported a report of a patient who had a very severe language production problem. So this patient was, at least by some stories, is described as being able to produce only a single syllable, tan, maybe sometimes a repetition like tan tan. And in fact, the patient is sometimes referred to as patient tan for this reason. But basically, the behavioral profile was this very severe language production deficit. And patients who have this type of language production problem are considered to have Broca's aphasia. So Broca got his name into the name of the aphasia. And the characteristic lesion of this type of aphasia was described to be in the posterior part of the left inferior frontal gyrus. So now we're in the frontal cortex, the kind of bottom part, and towards the back. And this region is still a region that we call Broca's area. So we have Broca's aphasia and Broca's area sort of historically linked through this body of work. And if you go to a museum in Paris, you can still observe the brain of the patient tan in a jar if you're interested. So as I said, Broca's aphasia is primarily characterized by a language production problem. So Broca's aphasic output is very slow, very laborious, non-fluent. So it's in fact also called non-fluent aphasia. These individuals' output is usually limited to very short utterances, something like 4 words or less. Their comprehension is pretty intact, including reading, but written output, just like spoken output, is very limited. So let's listen to a sample from a Broca's aphasia. Here we go. So this is a relatively new video, so not historical footage.
Can you tell us your name?
Mike Caputo.
And Mike, when was your stroke?
I was 7 years ago.
Okay.
And
what did you used to do?
Worked Autodesk, seven sales and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay. And who are you looking at over there when you turn your head?
That's my wife.
Okay. And why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech?
Yeah.
And what's that called?
Aphasia.
All right. And so why don't you work now?
I do.
And what do you do now?
Voices of Hope aphasia.
And what is Voices of Hope?
Peterburg, and Dr. Hinckley and myself, founder for me, and I members members probably 60 people.
So 60 people are part of Voices of Hope,
Yes.
which is an aphasia support group
Yes.
that you founded.
Yes.
And Dr. Jackie Hinckley is part of that.
Yes.
I'll pause this here. The link to the full video is in the slides, so you can finish it on your own time. But hopefully you notice that this person's comprehension is clearly completely fine. So he understands all the questions, but actually producing anything like a full sentence is super difficult for him. So it's very, like, I say here, it's a very laborious speech. And we'll talk a lot more about the kind of finer characterization of this type of aphasia later. Here's a writing example from a Broca's aphasic. So also just very, very difficult writing. Okay, so that's sort of a short summary of what Paul Broca contributed. What about Carl Wernicke? Well, Carl Wernicke subsequently described a language problem that was very different from Broca's aphasia, and that's what made this his observations interesting. So what he learned was that there was a group of patients who all had much more posterior damage. So the damage was to the boundary of the temporal and the parietal lobe, and that's what we still today call Wernicke's area. And these patients had a behavioral profile where their language production was sort of the opposite of non-fluent. So instead, it was very, very fluent, but also very semantically disordered. And similarly, again, their writing was very kind of nonsensical in a sense. And they also had a comprehension problem. So their understanding of speech was also clearly impaired, including in the written modality, so also impaired reading. And so here is, let's now listen to Wernicke's aphasic. So this is from the same website. You can listen to these clips in full. So it presents very differently.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good. We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talk with the people for them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. They'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. For him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We
get to
will store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
What were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment they don't show a darn thing.
The iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I'd like my change for me and change hands for me. With Happy. I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Good.
This girl was fairly good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for people, for us. Other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of hands for him. Sometime. Am I talk of any more to say?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I hope the world lasts for you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Okay, so I'm sure you'll agree that that language sample is very different from Broca's aphasia. The topic seems to jump around in a way that's quite difficult to follow. So on the basis of these two very different types of data sets, Carl Wernicke first sort of sketched a model that has the following basic components. So The model has two main areas. So Wernicke's area, which is this more posterior area, and then Broca's area more anteriorly. And Wernicke's area was considered to house something like the acoustic images of words or phonological representations, the sound representations of words. And then Broca's area, in contrast, housed what sort of the original language was motor images of words, so something like the articulatory codes that are crucial for production. And so the basic idea was that Wernicke's area was sort of this comprehension area, Broca's area was a production area. And that was sort of what was fundamentally underlying these two different types of aphasias. There was a third component to the model, which is the connection between these two areas. And so that's a fiber tract that's called the arcuate-fasciculus. And so I have a couple of speech samples here that are very similar to what we just watched before. So the third component is arcuate-fasciculus, and damage to this structure was considered to cause a third type of aphasia, so-called conduction aphasia. And so the essence of conduction aphasia was that if this structure is damaged, arcuate-fasciculus, then your ability to send a sound representation to the speech production area would be impaired. And the clinical diagnostic test that would show you that that ability is impaired is a word repetition test. So in particular, if you cannot repeat a non-word, that's something that was indicative of having conduction aphasia. So in non-word repetition, if I give you a word like might, does not mean anything in English. And in order for you to be able to repeat it, you have to represent that phonological form and then somehow ship it to your language production area so you can say it back. That was a task that sort of was considered to directly engage this connection between Wernicke's area and Broca's area. So that's the bare bones of the classic model. It was further refined by Wernicke Lichtheim, and his version of the model, so this is now the Wernicke Lichtheim model of language and the brain, was expressed as this diagram. So let's just walk through it a little bit. So it's basically the classic model, but some components just added. So here we have the auditory input. So that's what's entering your brain. We've looked at the auditory pathway quickly already. And so it's the auditory input that enters Wernicke's area, where we represent the phonological forms of words, so posterior temporal gyrus. So this is your kind of sound representation. And in order to then fully understand language or to understand a word, Wernicke's area makes contact with what's here called the concept field. So it's the semantic representations of language, and they were considered to be neurally distributed. So by that I mean they're not localized in any specific spot, contrary to what's here hypothesized for Wernicke's area, which is the localization of these phonological representations, for example. And then over here we have Broca's area. So now in order to produce language, you would need to activate the semantic representations and then map them onto articulatory codes. So here we would have these articulatory representations in left inferior frontal cortex, which is what we consider to be Broca's area. And from there on, then you can engage your muscles and your speech production machinery. And then here, crucially in the middle, Broca's area and Wernicke's area are connected, and that's representing the arcuate-fasciculus, which then correlates with conduction aphasia if damaged. So that's the basic classic model of language and the brain. It's very old. and all stems from the deficit lesion method. And next, what we'll talk about is what we think about this model today.